Many people have heard a moving and powerful story. It is a tale of great courage and cleverness. It says that quilts, those beautiful and comforting bed covers, held secret maps. These special quilts were said to guide enslaved people to freedom along the Underground Railroad. The story feels true because it speaks of hope in the darkest of times. It paints a picture of brave women using their everyday craft to fight injustice. But as we look closer at history, we must ask an important question. Is this compelling story a documented fact or a cherished piece of folklore? This essay will explore that very question. We will look into the heart of the myth, examining where it came from and why it remains so popular. The idea is that specific quilt patterns were stitched together to form a secret language. Each block was a symbol, a direction, a warning, hung on a clothesline or draped over a fence. A quilt that looked ordinary to most people would carry a life-saving message for the right person. This narrative is found in children's books, museum exhibits, and even school lesson plans, but its historical roots are worth a careful and respectful investigation. The story of the quilt code is surprisingly modern. It did not appear in the historical records of the 19th century, such as slave narratives or the letters of abolitionists. Instead, the idea gained widespread attention in the 1990s. It was introduced through a book titled Hidden in Plain View, a secret story of quilts and the Underground Railroad. The book was based on the oral history of one family in Charleston, South Carolina, Jacqueline Tobin, Ozella McDaniel Williams, a quilt seller who shared the story. According to this oral tradition, a specific sequence of 10 quilt patterns was used to guide fugitives. Monkey wrench pattern, signaling the time to gather tools and prepare. Wagon wheel meant it was time to pack for a journey. Each quilt, displayed one after another, would provide the next step. This narrative provided a clear, step-by-step system that was easy to understand and share. It was a compelling story that quickly captured the public's imagination. It offered a tangible, visual way to connect with the past. People could see the patterns and imagine secret messages. The story centered the contributions of women. It suggested women were masterminds of a secret communication system. It just makes sense that they would use something no one would ever suspect, like a simple quilt. That intuitive truth helped the story embed in popular culture. At the core of the quilt code legend are the patterns themselves. Names like log cabin, shoofly bear's paw, North Star are said to have held secret meanings. For example, the log cabin pattern, with its distinct center square, was said to identify a safe house. A quilt with a black center might mean the house was safe, while a red center could be a warning of danger. The bear's paw pattern was supposed to guide fugitives to follow animal trails through the mountains. The drunkard's path pattern was said to be a warning to take a zigzag route to throw off pursuers. These interpretations are very specific and make for a fascinating story. However, quilt historians point out a few problems with this theory. First, the names of quilt patterns were not standardized in the 19th century. A pattern called bear's paw in Ohio might have been called duck's foot in the mud in Virginia. The same design could have many different names, making a universal code very difficult to implement across different regions. A person escaping from one state might not recognize the pattern names used in another. This lack of a common language for patterns is a significant challenge to the code theory. Furthermore, many of the patterns cited in the quilt code legend were not actually known by their modern names during the time of the Underground Railroad. Some patterns became popular much later in the 19th century after the Civil War had ended. For instance, the name log cabin for that particular block design does not appear in print until the 1870s. While people may have been making similar designs earlier, the idea that it was widely known by a name that signified a safe house is not supported by the historical record of quilt making. This does not mean that quilts held no meaning. They certainly did. A quilt could be a friendship album, with each block made and signed by a different friend. A freedom quilt might have been stitched by an anti-slavery sewing circle to be sold at a fair to raise money for the abolitionist cause. These quilts made a very public statement against slavery. They were a form of political and social expression. Their meaning was not hidden in a secret code. It was proudly displayed for all to see and understand. When historians evaluate a claim, they look for primary sources. These are first-hand accounts from the time period being studied. For the Underground Railroad, this would include diaries, letters, autobiographies of formerly enslaved people, records from abolitionist societies. Despite extensive research by numerous historians, there are no known pre-Civil War primary sources that mention quilts as secret maps or signals. This absence of evidence is a major reason many specialists view the quilt code as a myth. Frederick Douglass, a prominent leader who escaped slavery himself, wrote detailed accounts of his experiences and the methods of the Underground Railroad. He never mentioned a quilt code. William Still, a key organizer in Philadelphia, kept meticulous records of the hundreds of people he helped, documenting their stories. His records contain no reference to quilts as signals. As one historian, Giles R. Wright, noted, known signals included bird calls and the placement of a lantern in a window, but quilts do not appear in the historical record. The story depends largely on a single oral tradition passed down in Ozella McDaniel Williams' family. That family story is valuable, but it stands alone without other supporting sources. Historians have interviewed descendants of other enslaved people and descendants or records of abolitionists. None shared similar stories of a quilt code. The lack of corroborating oral traditions from other families or communities makes it difficult to accept the code as a widespread practice. The real stories of escape often involved much more direct and practical methods of communication. Instead of a complex system of quilt patterns, helpers used simpler, more immediate signals. A song with specific lyrics, like "Follow the Drinking Gourd," could contain directions. A knock on a door, the placement of a candle in a window, a coded phrase exchanged between strangers were far more common. These signals were easier to change quickly if they were compromised. A quilt took a long time to make and couldn't be easily altered, so it would have been less practical and more risky for urgent, time-sensitive information. So, if the evidence does not support the idea of quilts as secret maps, why does the story continue to resonate so strongly with so many people? Well, the answer may be that the myth speaks to a deeper truth. It highlights the creativity, strength, resilience of people facing unimaginable oppression. The story is a testament to the human spirit's desire to find freedom and the powerful impulse to help others, even at great personal risk. It gives us a hero we can easily picture. A woman at her sewing frame, quietly plotting a revolution with her needle and thread. Even without a secret code, quilts were profoundly important to 19th century women, especially enslaved African American women. Quilting was one of the few creative outlets available to them. Within the scraps of fabric, they could embed their memories, their hopes, and their cultural heritage. Patterns and colors could reflect African textile traditions. A quilt could be a tangible link to a family that had been torn apart, with pieces of clothing from loved ones stitched into a new whole. In this way, quilts did carry stories and preserve history, just not in the form of a navigational map. The quilt code story encourages us to look at everyday objects with new eyes and to consider the hidden histories they might contain. It prompts us to ask questions and to learn more about the real, documented history of the Underground Railroad. It has brought renewed attention to the art of African American quilting and the incredible skill of the women who created these textiles. While the narrative may be folklore, its impact has been to spark curiosity and a deeper appreciation for a history that is too often ignored. The legend has become a gateway for many people to learn the real stories. In the end, perhaps we do not need the quilts to be maps to see their power. Their true value is not in a secret code, but in the love, care, and memory stitched into every seam. They are artifacts of survival. They represent warmth in a cold world, beauty in the face of brutality, and the enduring strength of family and community. The quilts themselves are the message. They tell a story of making something whole and beautiful out of the discarded scraps of life, a powerful metaphor for the struggle for freedom itself. And that is a truth that needs no secret code to be understood.